What is common sense? And why is everybody going on about it so much right now?
Has also finally seen common sense. Basically, biological men will be banned from all levels of the women's game of football.
This is a welcome decision, isn't it? A bit of common sense returning.
Yes, an outbreak of common sense.
At last, we've seen sense on sex.
Any change in position to one of common sense is going to be welcomed.
You know, I see this as a positive common sense move.
The woke worm is turning. I feel like common sense is beginning to prevail.
4 years ago, you weren't able to say that.
It may seem obvious, but it took a Supreme Court judge in the UK to turn common sense into law. Leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, said it was a victory for common sense.
At last, the lunacy is over. The Supreme Court have declared that a woman is somebody who is biologically born a woman. An outbreak of common sense from our judiciary.
People keep saying that this recent Supreme Court ruling, which judged that a woman can only be defined biologically, they keep saying that this is a win for common sense. Yippee! Finally, the adults are back in the room. And they all seem really jazzed and happy about it. But I guess as a trans woman, what I hear them saying is more something like, haha, you lose, you stupid he, she with your ugly makeup and your bad wig. Haha, you lose, time for you to go off and die in a puddle somewhere. Even though this is a clear degradation of trans freedoms, a lot of people are, I don't know, they're happier than pigs in shit by the look of it. And you can tell that to them, this is a thing that we should have just had sorted ages ago. You know, how are we under such a wild delusion for the past 20 years? Why didn't we nip this in the bud ages ago? Even our Prime Minister, the human Minecraft villain Keir Starmer, said that it brought much needed clarity to the situation, and then he mined downwards with a pickaxe and fell into like a pit of lava, and there was like a pig. I don't know, I've never actually played Minecraft, I'm just trying to be relatable. People keep going on about common sense, but what actually is it? Like, really? Like, do you know? Because, like, we know it's like, well, it's common sense, you know? It's a sense that you have that's common, or something like that. This is what Wikipedia describes common sense as. Common sense, from the Latin sensus communis, is knowledge, judgment, and taste which is more or less universal and which is held more or less without reflection or argument. Wow, no reflection, no argument? That sounds like a great foundation for a modern, sophisticated, complex, nuanced society. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. The implication that common sense makes is that it shouldn't take any kind of great effort or brain power to arrive at a certain conclusion. It's the smarts you're born with. Innate intelligence, innit? Like when a bird just knows how to fly after hatching out of an egg, except for the times when it doesn't, and it falls out of the tree and onto the floor and then gets inhaled by a snake. Let's be real here, common sense is just tribalism. The community decides what common sense is and what it isn't, based on whatever set of arbitrary circumstances that community came up within. There's no common sense to be found within a vacuum, unless obviously you are literally trapped inside of a giant vacuum and then you should try and find a way out of it. That's common sense. I'll give you that one. Ever since I can remember, I've always been deeply skeptical of and uncomfortable with the idea of common sense. Like, I've always been uncomfortable with any idea that kind of encourages you to look more simply at an issue that is incredibly complicated and nuanced. Not to mention the obvious issue that perceptions of what human beings perceive as common sense can change pretty drastically over even a period of just 100 years. Sure, it might be easy to look with the luxury of hindsight at something like women obtaining the right to vote or the racial desegregation of public life. Obviously, that's an obvious no-brainer, duh! That just isn't a truthful perspective, because at the time that those things were normal, it was common sense to just keep them that way. People who spoke out against those things, it was considered common sense not to do that. I think common sense is stupid because it seems to rely almost entirely on assumptions. Assumptions that our instincts are somehow obviously correct. Assumptions that your instincts are correct. You, You're an idiot. What do you know? Be honest. You're an idiot. Come on. You're stupid. You're a big stupid idiot. You are dumb as hell. I'm only slightly marginally smarter than you. I know I'm dumb too. We go around in life with this assumption that everybody just must think the same way that we do, and it's just not true. It's such an arrogant perspective if you think about it. And you know what they say. There's a famous saying, when we assume that's something when you assume that's something what you probably should try to do that less. To me, calling this Supreme Court ruling common sense is just overwhelmingly dishonest. Mainly because it seems to willfully ignore any actual sense of practical, day-to-day reality. And let's talk about reality for a minute. Reality is a thing that a lot of trans people, like myself, are often accused of not living within. And here's the thing with reality. Reality can be argued to mind-numbing degrees. Obviously, philosophically, it can be a lot of fun to argue if a table really is a table or if it just is perceived by humans as a table. It's like, okay, but at the end of the day, can it hold a drink? Can I put my soda pop on there? It can. Good, it's a table, let's agree. The way in which that relates to this is trans people have been using women's spaces statistically, on average, overwhelmingly without issue for the past, I don't know how, like decades and decades. It literally hasn't been a problem. You can always point to bad actors within, any minority group, but let's be honest, let's actually face reality for a second and admit that trans people have not been a problem in this. It's just, if you're saying that we are, then you are literally stupid. How then can it be an honest representation of actual reality to then turn around and now tell us you can't? You know that thing that you've been doing for years and years and years without issue? We decided you can't now. That is not reality. That is a gender critical version of reality. And if there's one thing I know about gender critical people, let's just say that you guys are not the most emotionally intelligent people out there. Personally, I'm tired of being accused that I don't live in reality. It's the anti-trans campaigners, the Supreme Court, and the absolute dog shit British media like The Telegraph that are the ones who are running away from actual reality. They're the ones who live in their own conveniently devised little dream world, actively trying to misrepresent and ultimately erase trans people from public life. And it's about time we started publicly saying that if you can't see that, if you can't determine the differences between us and them, if you don't have the intelligence to be able to ascertain that these people are bad actors and liars, then you're as bad as they are. So much of this weird discussion is predicated on trans women's apparent capacity to be abusers. The accusation that we're all just somehow dormant sex criminals is now built into the law. We've always known that this is just a completely ridiculous, unfounded view, and we know that it's not actually what these people care about. But now, this well-calculated, devised fiction has been built into law, and we're supposed to just sit here and take it for some reason. And like it's always been with queer lives, straight cisgender society is more than willing to go along with it, just so long as it diverts attention away from themselves. It doesn't matter one bit what the actual truth of the situation is. Common sense is being used as a totalitarian dog whistle in order to strip trans people of some of their most basic freedoms. In just a few short weeks after the Supreme Court ruling, the assertion that trans women are men has seemingly become completely normalised within the British mainstream media.
Banning what they call transgender women, meaning trans-identified men.
So we're all just comfortable with this. We're all just okay with allowing biology to trump anybody's lived experiences. You just want to go through life seeing the world in purely unphilosophically imaginative terms, devoid of inquiry, nuance, or actual truth. As in the actual truth that trans people live by and go through on a day-to-day basis with their families and friends and at work, and their own sense of self and just their own navigation through this complicated world. You're just like, oh, it's just about your chromosomes and your willy. If common sense is just reducing people down to their most basic physical characteristics, and if it means taking a more dogmatic, unflexible, neo-phrenological outlook on life, I don't want to be anywhere near that. Do you know what I mean? Common sense can be good for some things. Don't get into a stranger's car. Don't follow a trail of candy leading to a delicious looking steak on a plate, but it's underneath like a box with a stick with a string on it. That's common sense. You know, don't do that. But when we over-embrace common sense, bad things can happen. What about a person who's on trial for murder, but there isn't a lot of evidence to convict them, so the jury then relies on common sense, and that person is falsely accused and ends up receiving the death penalty, which is something that happens all the time. And I know there's a few of you absolute psychopath Thatcherian conservatives out there who are like, yeah, that's the future I want. But you guys, I feel pretty confident in saying, are bad. You're wrong and bad for that. To a pigeon, common sense means, oh, it's okay to land on this thing that looks like a tree. I land on loads of trees and I land on loads of things that look like trees. But one day that pigeon's going to think that, and it's going to land on that thing that looks like a tree, and it's going to get absolutely blown into smithereens. Because as it turns out, that thing that looked like a tree was a live electricity pole. Sometimes following your common sense is the worst thing you can do. Wouldn't it just be better generally if as a society we celebrated the pursuit of more information as opposed to less? Wouldn't it be good if we embraced the messiness and complexity and nuances of life, rather than trying to forcefully retrofit our own ideas of common sense onto it? The answer is, obviously, yeah, it'd be flipping great to do that. Unfortunately, it's just common sense to take the easier option. What do I know anyway? I'm just some mentally ill tranny after all. My senses are more uncommon.